long is a catheter kept in for after birth? So catheters are inserted during a caesarean birth. They are also inserted before and after a forceps birth. They also can be inserted before a ventouse, and for the majority of ventouse births have one afterwards as well to try and protect the bladder against any bladder damage. They are also inserted if you've had a postpartum hemorrhage, a manual removal of placenta, or a third or a fourth degree tear. Women with severe preeclampsia needing magnesium sulfate will also sometimes have a catheter, or anyone who has got really strict fluid balance because of whatever medical condition is going on with them. Now this is an in and out catheter. What normally is inserted after birth is something called a Foley's catheter, and that is where you would have the tube and this would be attached to a long tube and a bag to collect your urine in. And how it is inserted is it goes through your urethra, and what happens is the midwife on a little tube will insert some water that inflates a little balloon that enables that catheter to stay in your bladder and not just fall out. Going in, the catheter can be quite uncomfortable, and it's why if you're having anything like a caesarean birth, for example, it's not inserted until you've had your spinal or epidural analgesia inserted, and so that way it's much more comfortable, much more pain-free. And if it isn't in an emergency scenario or situation and a woman has got things like epidural or spinal on board, a catheter shouldn't be inserted until after that is effective. There are certain situations within labour, if you haven't got an epidural on board, where sometimes an in and out catheter, which doesn't have the balloon on the end, so it just goes in, empties the bladder, comes back out again, is sometimes used. When this can come out, so the majority of women will find that when they are up and mobile and they are out of bed for the first time, that is where the catheter can come out. This typically is around about 6 to 12 hours after birth, after the spinal or epidural has worn off at this stage. This is usually a really good time to ask for any pain relief before you get out of bed for the first time after any type of birth you've had. And what will happen is your midwife will come in with a syringe, she will pop it on the end of the little tube of the Foley's catheter, this will deflate the balloon, and then it will come out. Coming out, it feels a bit like, you know, when you have that burny wee sensation. It feels a little bit like that, but by the time you've realised it's already out. Going in tends to be far more uncomfortable than coming out. And what I tend to do is when I'm sat on the bed, I ask the woman to take a deep breath in for me. And usually by the time she's actually exhaled, it's already out. Usually the fear is much worse than the actual happening of it. Women also usually say that they feel far more comfortable as soon as it's out. And then the next bit is you need to wee within about 6 hours. Now when your catheter is out, this is a really good opportunity to hydrate yourself, get lots of fluid on board. You want about a litre worth of water at that stage. You will have 6 hours in which to be able to wee and be able to measure your first urine output. The reason being, if you are unable to wee, there is a chance of something called urinary retention. This is where your bladder fills and overdistends. That in itself can cause long-term bladder damage and problems in the future. For those women, sometimes they have a catheter reinserted, a daily review by an obstetrician, a physiotherapist referral, and sometimes they go home with a catheter inserted. So, to try and avoid all of that, get yourself hydrated and see if you can go and wee. And that's why the catheter doesn't come out until you're up and mobile, so that you can be able to pass urine comfortably at a point where you'll be able to make it to the toilet as well. It's also worth remembering that you can ask for it to come out earlier than that, and that is entirely your choice. It won't be advised, it won't be recommended. There is that risk that if you go into urinary retention, that you could potentially end up with a catheter back in the bladder recommended to you. So it is worth doing it at a point where you feel comfortable to get out of bed, if it's at all possible to wait that long. But as always, it's your choice and it is your body.